All right, my friends, let's talk about getting a Ph.D. Should you get one? Do I regret getting a Ph.D.? These are questions I get all the time, and honestly, I don't really know how to answer them because getting a Ph.D. has been kind of a mixed bag experience for me, honestly. So let's do a little academic list making and think about the best and worst things about getting a Ph.D. Number one, social connections, meeting people who are like-minded, making friends. The people who I think of as my core group of both social and professional connections are 100% the people that I met in my PhD program. I met my wife while I was in grad school. I met some of the people who populate my podcast, Nostalgia Trap. And I also have, I feel like, a kind of network of people I know just because they were my cohort in the set that we were in grad school at the same time. And I can call on those people wherever they might be and get help with things. That idea of having a kind of core group you carry with you is something that for me has been one of the most important and rewarding elements of getting a PhD. So that's number one. Number two is escaping the quote unquote real world, right? Getting out of the depressing drudgery of a corporate job or a service job. This was a big deal for me. I'm the type of person who, when I got out of college, the only jobs I got were really depressing sort of Joe jobs, either waiting tables or working in warehouses or then having a kind of cubicle job. I didn't want any of that. I wanted something that felt real to me, that felt like connected to things I cared about. And getting a PhD in American history really, really got me out of that world and into an academic world that, for better or worse, made me feel much more comfortable and much more connected to what I was doing. So getting out of the kind of work I was doing before I got a PhD was a big deal, and I would say a number one plus, and something I definitely don't regret. Number three is honestly should be kind of obvious, but learning stuff, getting smarter, more skilled. This was a huge benefit. I feel like I didn't really understand the world until my PhD program, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, but I studied American history, and when I entered the program, I thought I knew something about American history, but it really kind of sort of took my knowledge and my insights and my ability to think to a different kind of level, and that's something that's been easily one of the most valuable things is having a sense of knowledge and having a sense of expanding who I am, what I know, and more than sort of content knowledge, sort of how to think and how to be a balanced kind of thinker. All of that stuff has been really, really valuable for me, especially I think on the podcast, but in other areas too, where you kind of learn how to work through difficult stuff. And I think that's been a big benefit. Okay, so let's get to the shitty stuff. What are the worst things about getting a PhD? The number one worst thing for me has been this sort of taking you out of the world. It's sort of an ironic reversal of the connection thing is the disconnection. Social alienation, stress, the mental health elements of getting a PhD. It is not easy. You're sort of on your own, and that life isn't necessarily for everybody. I mean, the reality is you're going to spend a lot of time in a library, in classrooms, in places where you're kind of working in a solitary way. And I know that can kind of be romantic for a lot of people, but there's also just the larger thing of like being an academic person and how that removes you from the rest of American social and cultural life in a weird way. There are a lot of conversations that stop when you say you have a PhD, when you're talking to people who don't. And that's a kind of awkward thing that it's something that I've never really gotten over because so much of my family and social kind of world are not academics. And so that kind of disconnect between the academic world and the rest of the world is something that could be both a really great thing and a really challenging thing. Number two worst thing about getting a PhD, other academics, I have to say, that I had to learn that there are a lot of people in academia that are not exactly on my wavelength, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but you meet some of the worst people in the world in the academy, including, every kind of social climber, people who are incompetent and are succeeding only because of their connections. And I think that honestly is one of the hardest lessons for me being in a PhD program, coming from middle class, working class type people, not coming from a family of elite professors. I had to learn that there were a lot of people in grad school that are very much part of a generational thing going on in their family where they've been like PhDs for many decades and centuries. And I didn't have that lineage. And that was a tough lesson, is learning that there is this kind of a bourgeoisie within academia, and learning that you don't really escape those awful class hierarchies. And in fact, they're thrown in your face in grad school is something that was definitely a big challenge for me. And number 3 is probably, I think, the biggest challenge for everyone when thinking about PhDs and whether or not to go to grad school, especially if you're in the humanities. But I think I'm talking to STEM people too. There's a crisis of higher education in this country. The economics of getting a PhD sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a tremendous amount of labor exploitation. There is a job market collapse, especially in the humanities. I got a history degree. I don't have a tenure track job, and I don't think I ever will. So there's kind of like this other conversation of like, what do you actually do with a PhD? Are you going to be able to trade it for a lot of money and a good job? And that's a giant fucking question mark, and it's one in my life too. And it's made me think a lot, especially as I sort of am many years out of my PhD, don't have a tenure track job, adjunct teaching jobs drying up. The question becomes, well, did I make a mistake in getting a PhD? And that's where you have to go back to me. For me, you have to go back to the first 3, which are the good things about getting a PhD, and think about it in a more balanced way, because it's not just about that economic exchange, although it's really hard not to think of it that way when you've spent lots of money, you've gone into tremendous debt, you've given up, years of your life for this pursuit. And when it's unclear what the end point of all that is, can make you think a lot about your life. So that's sort of where I'm at right now, and that's as honest as I can be about it. I hope that helps you. We'll see you next time.